Hi there, Kendra Tolbert here. I'm a registered dietitian and yoga teacher, and I specialize in women's health, fertility, and PCOS. And today I have an interview for you. Now, I did this interview last week with one of my dear friends and favorite dietitian, Stacy Leung. She specializes in plant-based nutrition, and that's what we talked about. I asked her some of the commonly asked questions that I've received about plant-based nutrition. So if you are curious about what it might mean to be flexitarian, vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, lacto-avo, all of that, she's going to answer those questions in this interview. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Stacy.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's always nice to chat with you. This is something that we do outside of being recorded, so it'll be fun to do it, I guess, witnessed by others. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let them see what our conversations actually sound like.
So I have tons of questions for you all around plant-based nutrition. So I'll get into the first one. So first question, how did you develop an interest in plant-based nutrition?
Growing up, I never really enjoyed eating meat. I always preferred vegetables and fish and tofu. So, it became easier as I got older to just tell people I'm a pescatarian. And instead of just saying, hey, I don't like eating meat, and then getting people would get super offended. And I still have friends who don't necessarily agree with that. But in the end, growing up in just a family and culture that ate all foods, but did favor meat. When I told them hey, I'm pescatarian now, it was a bit of a shock. So, and I always got questions like, are you healthy? Do you know what you're doing? And I was like, yes, I do, because I study nutrition and I work in nutrition. So living on my own and just staying with it and showing them that I could be healthy. I would go and get my annual physical and check my iron levels, B12 and vitamin D, and, kind of troubleshoot that way if needed. And so far it hasn't been, serious at all. So obviously nutrition works and eating well works. And so I know that, lots of people are also going through this, and sometimes they don't have the support of their families, don't know where to start, which is why I decided to focus my own practice on nutrition and vegetarian health, I guess I should say.
Love it, love it, love it. I love that it was just a natural kind of reaction to your own feelings around the food. So it wasn't because it was the trendy thing to do. It doesn't sound like it was trending at all at that point, really, especially the way it is now. But it was really just you listening to your body and saying, this is my preference, and so I'm going to follow my preference. I love that. So there's a lot of confusion when it comes to what exactly plant-based means, vegetarian means, and what veganism is. And so I'd love to hear from you. How do you define plant-based nutrition?
Yes, there's a lot of definitions out there. If you just search on the internet, what does plant-based mean? And you'll get a lot of definitions, and some will contradict each other. So the way I look at the term plant-based is just the overall category of vegetarianism, which includes veganism. So all vegetarians eat plants, vegans eat plants, and some vegetarians will eat animal protein. To just break it down in certain, so that if we were to say, plant-based is this overall category of vegetarianism, there is, first, if we start from big to small, there's semi-vegetarianism, also known as flexitarian, which means, this person will eat everything, but maybe not so much meat, right? I guess I've seen the term plant forward being thrown around, and I guess we can say it's that. So constantly thinking about plants. Plants are their main thing, plant-based protein, and but also they're still eating beef sometimes. So, it's up to them what they want to be flexible with. And then there's pescatarian, which is only eating seafood and fish as the form of animal protein, along with animal byproducts like dairy, eggs. And in dairy, there's milk and cheese and yogurt. So from there's lacto-ovo vegetarian, which there are no animal proteins, but you'll have someone who's a lacto-ovo vegetarian will have dairy and eggs. And then you can split those up into lacto or ovo. And then from there, you can say vegan, which is no animal protein and no animal byproducts. Animal byproducts are just the products of what animals make. So let's say bees make honey, vegans are not going to have honey. They'll have a substitute like agave or maple syrup, or, they won't eat eggs because it comes from chicken. And it's more of like an ethical reasoning behind it. And so yeah, there's lots to consider. There's lots of categories that someone can choose to fall under. And we can pick, but really the label is for other people than ourselves. We can eat the way we want to eat.
So it sounds like the common theme, though, regardless of which form of plant-based nutrition, is that plants are the focus. So as long as you're eating plenty of plants, then kind of hanging out in the plant-based world.
Yeah. And, I think plants can sort of be a confusing term as well, because when someone says, I want to eat more plants, I'm thinking, well, is that vegetables, or is it, fruits? Is it, tofu, right? So when people say plants, I have to probe a little bit more, ask a little bit more, because there could be many things. Like they're like, oh, I want to eat more plants, but that doesn't mean I want to try, beans, right? So, yeah, that's also a confusing thing too. All the lingo. You have to make sense of it.
One of the things that I think a lot of people get concerned about when they decide to go plant-based in whichever form is they're concerned about getting enough protein. So is it possible to get enough protein in a plant-based diet?
Yes, definitely. There is lots of protein in plant foods. It's just about making sure that we have a variety and that there's a balance to it. So to just sort of kind of run through briefly what plant-based proteins are, let's put aside, the fish, the seafood, the beef, the chicken, the pork, all the animals, let them live in their playpen. And plant-based proteins are going to be mainly an equivalent to something like an animal protein. And that would be your soy products like tofu and tempeh. And then there's your beans of all kinds. Doesn't matter if it's black or kidney beans or, pinto beans. Then we have your lentils and legumes, your nuts, all type of nuts, and your nut butters, which is like almond butter, peanut butter, sunflower seed butter. And I don't think I'm missing anything there, but I do want to say that, of course, dairy and eggs are also considered protein. The one thing I do want to say is that sometimes we often get confused with non-dairy milk. So non-dairy milk tends to not have protein in there unless it's added in supplementally or unless it's a soy milk. Because quite often to make something like almond milk, you would grind up the almonds and then squeeze the water out. And if you were to look at the nutrition label for almond milk, there's hardly any protein in there. So if you are using a plant-based milk or a non-dairy milk, it's always good to, throw in some seeds, some nut butters, or just have another extra protein source in there to bulk up your meal.
Good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
So animals do not have a monopoly on protein. Protein can be found in other foods. Good to know.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, whole grains even have some traces of protein. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now, what are the health benefits of following a plant-based eating pattern?
There are. So, I will say that even if you are not vegetarian or vegan, you can still have these benefits that I'm going to say by just reducing your overall meat consumption. Right. So vegetarians and vegans tend to have lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease and diabetes. However, when it comes to longevity, like living longer or cancer prevention, there's not so much of a difference between meat eaters and vegetarians based on the research that I recently read. But it is to say, like, there are some benefits, but studies also show that if you just reduce your consumption, you can still reap the benefits of reducing your risk of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes.
Good. So those are definitely, I think, reasons to add in more plants and possibly in the process of doing that, bring down how much meat you might be turning to as well. Cool. And so besides our own personal benefits that we would experience, what are the environmental benefits?
So within environmental benefits, there is research saying that consuming a vegetarian diet is beneficial for our environment. So it can actually slow global warming. And I like to think of it like supply and demand. So if we are eating less meat overall as a population, the demand will fall, which means it can be positive for global warming. And I say this because agriculture or raising animals does take up a lot of natural resources. So if a farmer is having their animal farm on this land that is just really straining the resources around the land around it, then they won't be able to, the land that doesn't have the animals on it may be suffering a little. Be water, lots of things. Yeah.
Okay. We kind of touched on this earlier when we talked about people being concerned with getting enough protein, but what are some other nutrients that people who have decided to go either vegan or vegetarian, like what do they need to be aware of in terms of nutrient deficiencies? That was my roundabout way of getting to that.
So the big three, aside from protein, would be iron, B12, and vitamin D. I mean, vitamin D is a concern for meat eaters as well. So I wouldn't say that it's exclusive to vegetarians and vegans. But iron and B12 are because just naturally animal proteins just tend to have higher sources. It's not to say though that we as vegetarians and vegans, we can't get enough iron. But with B12, it is something to be concerned. So I usually recommend a vitamin D and a vitamin B12 supplement, but also is to talk to your doctor to check your levels for that. So the second three would be calcium, zinc, and omega-3s. If you are having a well-balanced diet, calcium and zinc should not be an issue. If you're having fish, omega-3s shouldn't be an issue as well. But if you are vegan, there are foods that do have omega-3s. So that's just the second three. But it wouldn't be a cause of concern as long as you're having a balanced diet.
Yeah. I really love that you said it's important to have a conversation with your doctor, because just because you're eating a particular pattern doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually experiencing the deficiencies that someone might be at risk for. And so it's important to actually talk to your doctor and know what's going on with your body, which is something you also said very early on, that you would go annually and have these things checked so that you would know what to do to make sure that you were supporting your body. So talk to your doctor.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, and also, if for me personally, like, I don't love taking supplements unless it's necessary. That's just my personal view. And so if I'm taking these B12 supplements and my B12 is where it should be, is there a reason for me to take it, or if it's too high? So dosage is also important as well.
Good advice. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of us who don't want to go vegetarian or vegan, but we still want to get those benefits in, um, what are some ways that we can add in more plant-based foods without necessarily taking on a particular label?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's just so many little things that we can do. Um, the one thing, or the first meal that I usually like to think about is breakfast being more plant-based, or doesn't have to include meat, because there's just so many options. So I think the easiest place to start, if you were to choose a meal to focus on, would be breakfast. Because you don't have to add bacon bits to yogurt. If you wanted yogurt, you can make oatmeal savory or sweet. So there's a lot of playing room, and I think it makes it easy to start the day. Or just like a thought, is the concept is easier. At least it has been for my clients when we pick a particular time. And then with just adding more plants, like some of my clients just have trouble remembering to have vegetables. So if that is the concern, I would say, before you even think about protein, like, ask yourself, like, what vegetable do I have today? And not every day will you have a vegetable on hand, but if you are going grocery shopping, asking yourself, like, what is the vegetables that I would like to buy? And also knowing that's usually the first section that you see when you walk into the grocery store. Um, and, like, quick things to just, like, if you're making a soup or pasta, and if you have spinach or kale or any kind of leafy green, you can just throw it in there because it wilts fast. You don't have to use another pot, and it takes up the flavor of whatever you're cooking. So I would say, like, those three tips are great. And, with fruit, if fruit is your concern, just thinking about it as a snack could be a really good, just easy way to put it in, instead of thinking, like, what fruit am I going to have for breakfast? We can have fruit or vegetables any time of the day. Um, Plant-based proteins, though, it's not as easily, I would, in my experience and with my work with clients, just switching out beef or, like, steak for a tofu, there's a learning curve there because the flavorings need to be different, the preparations need to be different. So that's where a little bit more effort might come in, and looking at recipes online and blogs can be really helpful.
Cool. So you actually touched on an answer. I think it might be an answer to my next question, where you mentioned adding leafy greens to soup because it'll take on the flavor and it's just an easy way to do it. And so a lot of times when I work with clients, they're just like, I don't like vegetables. When I have a conversation with them, so often I find that they'll, like, marinate their meat, they'll add all these seasonings to their meat, and then they just, like, steam their vegetables, and they're like, they don't taste good. So what are some ways that you have to make vegetables more palatable?
I mean, that's certainly an easy one. The question I'd actually like to ask, because everyone's so different, is, like, um, what about the vegetable do you not like? Right? Is it the taste? Is it the smell? Is it the texture? There's To pinpoint why we don't like something is very eye-opening. And so if it's a texture thing, sometimes just, like, cooking in a different way could be easily solved. And if it's like a flavor thing, then maybe we can just try, like you mentioned, like just not steaming it and adding butter, but try different spices like you would marinate a steak or marinate chicken. So there's definitely like exploring why you don't like something. And this goes with all foods, right? This is not only vegetables. Vegetables just seem to be the big one. So exploring that, knowing that there are different ways to prepare and eat vegetables. So being open to that, I think, is really important, and just not ruling it out. Because it does take at least 10 times for a child to consider liking something. So if we are no longer children and we're a little bit more stubborn, it might take us a little longer. So, and like when I have talked to other adults who don't like certain foods but want to learn to like certain foods, it's really first to be open and obviously understand why you don't like certain things. And as a low commitment, don't go out, buy it and cook it. Just go out and order it if you're at a restaurant, so that you can share it and have a bite and not feel defeated if you don't like it, because I'm sure someone else at the table would like it. So so I think there's so many different strategies, but usually those are like the first ways I like to start navigating.
I like that. I like that you said learn to like it. So it's something that can be developed. It's not like you either like them or you hate them and it's a part of your personality and it's not changing, but it's something that you can explore and develop, maybe a liking for them over time. And you might not like all of them, which is fine. There are some vegetables I adore and there are other vegetables and I'm like, keep them far away from me. And so you can find the ones that you like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I used to hate tomatoes. Just as a child, I just hate tomatoes. Didn't understand why people put tomatoes in salads. And then I realized that the only way I liked a tomato was in like a sandwich with mayo on it. And then as I got older and I was exposed to other types of tomatoes that had more flavor comparatively to the beefsteak I grew up with, I think that's what changed. So, it's possible. It just takes time.
Good to know. There's hope. Okay. So thank you for answering all of these questions. And I know that people are going to have more questions from you and they can definitely learn a lot from you. So where should they go if they want to learn more about you and what you have to offer?
Yeah. So I would love to answer more questions. You can head to my website, which is Stacy, STACYKLEUNG, which is just my full name and middle initial.com. Or you can head to my Instagram at Stacy K Leung RD. So I'm in 2 places, but easily accessible.
No. Okay. Well, definitely make sure that you head over to her Instagram and to her website. I'll make sure to include links in the description box below. So thank you so much for being here, Stacy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun to talk.
Bye.